أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Verse number 9. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. Or have you supposed that the story of the companions of the cave and the rakim were a wonder among our signs? If you remember last week when we were discussing verse number 7 and 8, the concept was put forward that whatever is on the earth has been made as an adornment for the people to be attracted to it, to interact with the life of this world, to continue with their lives, and then, of course, we will make it like a barren land. Nothing will remain on it. Now, here, some examples are given for us to grasp this idea better. 4 stories are mentioned in this surah until the end of the surah, where it returns back to the idea of making everything on the earth as a barren land, all to somehow elaborate on that concept. The stories are, one is the story of Ashab al-Kahf. The second story is the story of 2 men whom the Quran does not name, but having a conversation about something which explains that adornment of of Allah on the earth, and how it becomes a barren land in a more tangible way. And the third one is the story of Musa and Khizr, which looks at the same concept from a different aspect. And the fourth one is the story of Zulqarnain, which at the end of the story, he says, when Allah wishes, he would destroy everything on this earth. So 4 stories are mentioned just to explain and expound on the idea of adornment. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا. We have made whatever is on the earth as a zina to test them who is best in conduct. Now, the story of Ashab al-Kahf starts like this. Or have you supposed, am hasibta, or, and this am, which means or have you, a question in this sort of tone, is what connects it to the previous verses. Or have you supposed that the story of companions of the cave and rakim was a wonder among our signs? Now, the story, if you remember about the cause of revelation of the whole chapter, that the Jews taught the mushrikun of Arab to ask some questions from the Prophet, peace be on him, and 3 questions were made. One was about Ashab al-Kahf, who were they? The other one was about Musa and the wise man whom he met, and the third one was about the Zulqarnain. Now, this is the story of the first question. However, apparently the story of Ashab al-Kahf was already known among the Arabs of the time, especially among the people of Mecca. It was already known. That's why it is actually put forward in this tone that, do you think it was a wonder? Meaning that everyone was thinking this was a very strange story. Apparently, this story of the sleepers of the cave, the 7 sleepers of the cave, or whatever the number they thought, because they had a dispute about the number of them, apparently this was a very well-known story of the martyrs of Christendom among the Christians of the region. And therefore, the Arabs had heard about the story as well. That yes, among the martyrs of the early ages of Christianity, there were 7 people who fled to the cave, or a number of people who fled to a cave, and then they were put to sleep there or died there, and then they were given life again by God. So the story was known. So the way the story is told is different from the story of Musa or from the story of Zulqarnain. It starts with a question showing that, yes, of course, you all have heard about the story of people of the cave, but first of all, you think it's a very strange thing, it's not believable. And secondly, you don't know the details of the story. So the story is told in this way, that a summary of the story, what was known among the Arabs of the time or people of Mecca, what was known is mentioned, and then goes into the details and disputes about the numbers and how many years they were put to sleep. Those details are mentioned after the summary of the story. So the summary starts like this: or have you supposed that the companions of the cave and rakim were a wonder among our signs? Now, how is this connected to the previous verse? Because, of course, a concept was put forward, and then the story is told to prove that concept or to emphasize that concept. Now, the exegetes have mentioned a couple of ideas. First of all, about what this question means. Why the question is asked like this: do you think it was a wonder? And the answer is a rhetorical question. The answer should be, certainly it's not a wonder. It's not a wonder, although all of us would think, how is it possible that a few people go to the cave, they sleep there or die there for several hundred years, then they wake up. God says this is not a wonder at all among our signs. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من أصحابنا من آياتنا عجبا is a rhetorical question saying that no, it was not a wonder. Now, Fakhruddin al-Razi and a couple of other exegetes, they say that if we look around us, there are so many wonders of creation that actually eclipse this sort of wonder of people being put to sleep for 300 years. If you look at yourself, for example, the way you are created, if you look at the vineyards and grapes, the sweet grapes and sour grapes which are there, if you look at the sun and moon, these are wonderful signs of Allah. So this should not be taken as a wonder. However, if we take this meaning, it doesn't somehow connect us to the previous verses. That the previous verses were talking about the slumber of people on this earth, how everyone is attracted to the wares of this world, and it is as if everyone is sleeping. They don't know what is the reality of this world. And of course, when they die, they wake up, as the Prophet, peace be on him, said, "An-nasu niyam," or Amirul Mu'minin, "An-nasu niyam, fa-idha matu intabahu." People are like sleeping creatures, like sleepwalkers. When they die, then they wake up. They realize the reality of this world. Now, Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayh, makes a very beautiful connection between this verse and the previous verse. It says that, do you think that this is strange that some people slept for 300 years and then they woke up and they saw the reality? Now, the whole story is about to show a reality to these people. That's why they were put to sleep, or that's why they died, and then they were given life to show a reality to them. Now, the Allama says that, look at the life of human being on this earth. Everyone is in a slumber. They don't wake up. They don't see things. It's as if there is several thousand years of sleeping for a human race, and they don't wake up. Whoever comes to this world is put to sleep, and then when they die, they are raised again. So do you think that this is a strange, while you see the slumber and sleep of people in this earth, on this earth, continuously happening? So it is not strange. However, we wanted to show something to them and to the people. To them and to the people outside the cave, and we showed it to them, and you have to know that we show this reality to all of you, the reality that we wanted to show them. I'll talk what reality God wanted to show these people. So, or have you supposed that the story of companions of Kahf and Rakim was a strange thing among our signs? Now, what was the story? The story is told in summary: إِذْ أَوَيَ الْفَتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. When some young people sought refuge in the cave. فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. And they asked God to show them their direction, to show them a way of rectitude. They went to the cave and they asked God to do that with them. Now, let's, before going to the story, talks about some of the words and phrases mentioned in this verse. So, Ashab al-Kahf wa rakim, companions of Kahf and Rakim. Now, here Qara'i has translated companions of Kahf and inscription, Rakim as inscription. The exegetes from the early days had actually difficulty to understand what's the meaning of Rakim. Now, most of them have thought that this is an Arabic word or term, and therefore they said Rakim means marqum, inscription, written thing, and they are called Ashab al-Kahf wa rakim because when they went to the cave, the cave was sealed on them, they put in an inscription on the door of the cave telling their story. Now, to understand that story or that inscription, we have to somehow elaborate the story. But the details, more details, I will tell you later. There were some young ministers or consultants of the Roman ruler, not the Roman Empire, because it was not in Rome. They were not in Rome. They were in somewhere in Syria or close to Jordan, somewhere under the Roman territories. Now, they were young people. They believed in Christianity. They believed in Jesus. And they somehow concealed their faith because at that time, the Roman Empire was very harsh on Christianity. We know the early days of Christianity. This is before Constantine. Before Constantine, they were very harsh on Christians. And if anyone converted from Roman faith to Christianity, they killed them. There was absolutely no mercy on them. And especially these young people were in the court of the ruler. The ruler of the time in those territories who was under the Roman Empire. If they were found to be Christians, of course, they would have been killed instantly. Now, they were concealing their faith. And about this concealing of faith or taqiyya, I will talk later, because every time the story of Ashab al-Kahf are mentioned, the idea of taqiyya comes up and how these people were actually given twice as rewards, because one reward was for them to have faith in Jesus, and the other reward was to conceal their faith so that they were not killed. Now, at some point, something happened that they couldn't actually stand with their concealment, with the concealment of their faith. They didn't want to do something which was quite abhorrent for them, probably prostrating for the emperor who was coming to visit there or something like that. So they thought that they cannot continue with this concealment of the faith, so they ran away from the court. They ran away, probably they revealed their faith, they were arrested, then they ran away, and they went to the cave. The ruler searched for them, and they traced them up to the door of the cave, and they found them in the cave, but they were like dead people. Now, when they went into the cave, they became like dead people. No one dared to go close to them. It is mentioned later on that if you see them, you will just turn away and run away from them inadvertently, without your own control. They were made in such a way that no one could get close to them. So they thought that after we found them, what to do with them? They said the best thing is just to block the door of the cave so that they die there, or they remain there forever. So they blocked the door of the cave so they couldn't come out, and then they put an inscription on the door of the cave that this is the fate of whoever betrays the Roman faith and runs away, or something like that. And their names were written on that inscription and was stuck to the door of the cave. This is why they say they are called Ashabul Rakim, the companions of inscription, because of that inscription. However, earlier, this was the idea of Fakhruddin Razi and some other exegetes. The earlier exegetes of the earlier times, they really did not subscribe to this idea. Ibn Abbas specifically, who is the head of all scholars of the Quran. We don't have anyone more knowledgeable in Quran than Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas, rahmatullah alayh. Specifically, Abdullah ibn Abbas says that I don't know what is the meaning of rakim. To quote him, Ikrama quotes from Ibn Abbas. He says that kullu al-Qur'an a'lamuhu. I know all the Quran. That means the words, terms, sentences, the connection, everything I know. Illa arba'a. Four terms in the Quran I don't know what it means. Ghaslin, Hanan, Awwah, and Raqim. Now, apart from what the confession of Abdullah ibn Abbas about not knowing these 4 words or 4 terms, it's very interesting that the Quran was, at that time, was using terms which were so uncommon among the Arabs that even the most knowledgeable in Arabic literature, they didn't know about these terms. It used exotic terms. I have mentioned this before, especially when the Quran describes paradise and hell, and especially paradise, it uses exotic words from other languages, Arabized and used in the Quran to give it a higher standard of literature, something that no one could reproduce, no one could bring like of it. And these words are terms which Ibn Abbas says, I don't know about them. And then he says that Za'ama Ka'ab al-Ahbar thought something about this meaning, actually somehow made up something about this meaning, that this was the village from which they escaped. It was the village from which it escaped. Now, this Za'ama Ka'ab, he supposed is somehow close to reality, but not exactly. Somehow close to reality that Raqim was a place rather than an inscription or something like that. There are other words, other opinions about this, but one very interesting opinion, which has been corroborated by evidence recently, is that the cave to which they escaped is recently found in somewhere in Jordan. Of course, about the cave, where the cave was, there are lots and lots of stories. Wherever people found a cave, they said this is the cave of Ashabul Kahf. In Syria, in other places, probably you have visited a cave which in Syria, they say this is the cave of Ashabul Kahf. So wherever they found a cave, they said this is the cave of Ashabul Kahf. But recently, about 50 years ago, something like that, a cave was found in Jordan, which is very much like matches the descriptions given about the cave, and also the grave of 7 people. Or 7 graves are found there, and above that there was a church which exactly matches the description mentioned here, and that cave is close to a village which used to be called Rajim. And therefore, Allama Tabatabai Rahmatullah alayhi says, this is where they escaped to. And as I said, Ka'b said this was the village from which they escaped, but this is where they escaped to. They escaped to Rajim or Rakim. Therefore, Rakim doesn't mean marqum or inscription or something like that. It is the story of people of the cave who escaped to a place close to Rakim. There's another opinion about Ashab al-Kahf wa Rakim, and the opinion is that these are actually two different groups of people. Ashab al-Kahf are different from Ashab al-Rakim. And there is a hadith about it, that Ashab al-Rakim were three people. They escaped to a cave or from a rain, not from people. There was heavy rain, they were climbing mountain, there was heavy rain, they escaped to a cave, and there was a landslide. And the door of the cave was blocked by a huge rock that they couldn't move. And they thought that they are going to die there. Then every one of them mentioned one good thing that they had done in their lives, and then they asked God, Ya Allah, if you think that I did this sincerely for you, save us from this blockage. And with each dua, 1/3 of the rock was removed from the blockage, and then they came out. Now, this story is quite manifest that the story is fake, and the hadith should be a fabricated one. First of all, how is it possible? Allah mentions, do you think Ashab al-Kahf wa Rakim were among our wonderful signs, and then does not mention the story of Ashab al-Rakim and mentions the story of Ashab al-Kahf? Secondly, what is the relation of that to the whole context of the surah? There is no relation. And thirdly, what they mentioned there, I think it's sort of an ethical story to convince people or to somehow motivate people to do good things, made by one of the storytellers of that time and then put in form of a hadith from the Prophet or from Ayyimah alayhimus salam. So I think we have to absolutely rule out the story that these were two different people and the story of them was different. Now, fair enough, we want to go now to the core of the story to see how it is related to the main concept put forward. But before that, about this verse, there is one other thing that we have to mention. And that is, it is reported that the severed head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when was passing through the Kufa streets, was reciting this verse, Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahf wal raqim kanu min ayatina ajaba. Now, this is a very strange story, and why among all the verses of the Quran, the severed head of Imam Hussein was reciting this verse? Again, is a question. Now, the difficult thing about these sorts of stories is that most of them are just made up things, just to somehow embellish the idea of Karbala and Imam Hussein and such things. So most of the stories like this, which tell us about the strange happenings, extraordinary things happening after Ashura or simultaneously with the event, we cannot believe them. They are mostly they are just embellishments made later. However, this one is strangely reported by very credible people. The person who reports this is Zayd ibn Arqam. And Zayd ibn Arqam is not someone to be underestimated. You know, Zayd was a companion of the Prophet, and at the time he was living in Kufa. Why he is not anywhere in the story of Muslim ibn Aqil or other ensuing incidents, we don't know. But he was a very credible man. He is the one about whom, or for his support, certain verses of Surah Al-Jum'ah were revealed. You know, he was about 13, 14 years old when the Ghazwatu Bani al-Mustalaq took place in the 6th year of Hijrah. And in that Ghazwa, during the time where everyone from Medina were there to somehow fight against Bani al-Mustalaq, a quarrel took place between Ahlul Medina and Ahlul Makkah, between Muhajirun and Ansar. In that quarrel, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who was the head of the hypocrites in Medina, became very angry, and he said, look what you have done. He said to people of Medina, look what you have done. You have given refuge to these people from Mecca, and now they are fighting you, they are insulting you, and I swear that when we go back to Medina, the person with dignity, meaning himself, would expel or deport the person with the humiliated person from Medina, meaning the Prophet. So, لَا يُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَزَلَّ. The man with dignity would deport or send out the man throws out the humiliated man. Now, this conversation was heard by Zayd ibn Arqam. As I said, he was 13, 14 years old. So he came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, they are conspiring against you. And he said, what conspiracy? He said, Abdullah ibn Ubay wants to somehow motivate the people of Medina. When you go back to Medina, they want to rise against you, and they say they want to throw you out. So the Prophet summoned Abdullah ibn Ubay and said, what is this talk you are mentioning, is reported from you? What you have in mind? And he said, no, I haven't said this. And he called upon all his friends and companions who were present. They said, no, Abdullah ibn Ubay didn't say anything like that. And the Prophet said, so what Zayd says? They say, Ya Rasulullah, this is a boy. You accept the word of a boy and you do not accept what all of us are saying. All of us are saying that he didn't say such a thing. And this boy, Zayd, says that we have mentioned such a thing. So the Prophet said, okay, I accept. He didn't say anything. And, Prophet was very quick in accepting whatever people said. Even though he may not believe, but he did not somehow try to refute people in their statements. So Zayd became very upset, very sad actually, that everyone said that this boy told a lie, so that to create discord among the companions of the Prophet, he wanted to create fitna and such things, and everyone was rebuking Zayd for that. And then on the way, when they were going, Surah Al-Jum'ah was revealed. And, of course, the verses that هُمُ الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ, and this is what Abdullah ibn said actually. هُمُ الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ لَا تُنْفِقُوا عَلَى مَنْ عِنْدَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ حَتَّى يَنْفَضُّوا. Surah Al-Munafiqun, Surah Al-Munafiqun. They are the ones who say that do not give charity to the companions of the Prophet, so that they disperse. وَلِلَّهِ خَزَائِنُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَكِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ يَقُولُونَ. Exactly what Zayd said was revealed by Allah. يَقُولُونَ لَئِن رَجَعْنَا إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ لَيُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلُّ وَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Now, of course, Zayd was corroborated, and he was very firm until the end of his life. He was very firm in supporting the Prophet. Now, the other thing about Zayd is that he was always in love of Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. And no one has heard or has ever said that Zayd is not credible in whatever he reports. So this is what about Zayd ibn Arqam. The second thing is that, of course, we have many fake, fabricated traditions reported from many credible companions of the Prophet. However, this is reported by Shaykh Mufid in Al-Irshad. And again, Shaykh al-Mufid, Abu Abdullah, rahmatullah alayhi, Shaykh al-Mufid is not someone to be underestimated it in his report. He never reports something that he did not verify himself, especially things like this. You know that he is the one who says, for example, I'm not convinced that, for example, Imam al-Hadi was poisoned. And he says, so I do not believe in that. And this hadith which says all of us are either poisoned or martyred, I cannot accept that because there is no evidence that, for example, some of the A'imah were poisoned. So he is very firm in verifying whatever he reports. So he has reported this. He says that Zayd ibn Arqam says, مر به علي وهو على مر به علي وهو على رمح وأنا في غرفة. So the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was passed by me on the spear, and I was sitting in a room, apparently in the second floor or first floor, on a balcony or a room which had a window to the street. So the head passed by me, and when it came just passing in front of me, فَلَمَّا حَاذَانِ سَمِعْتُهُ, I heard the head يقرأ أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. Or do you think that the story of Kahf and Raqim are a wonder among our signs? And I swear by God that all the hairs of my body raised from the strange things that I saw and I heard from the head of Imam Hussein. And then inadvertently, I just said, it just came out of my mouth, I said, رَأْسُكَ وَاللَّهِ يَبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أَعْجَبْ وَأَعْجَبْ. يَبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, your head is more a wonder than the story of Ashab al-Kahf. If that is one of the wonders, your recitation while your head is severed from your body is a wonder. So this hadith is mentioned. If we want to say that why this verse, if we accept this hadith, which is quite credible, why this verse was recited by Imam Hussein alayhi salam among all verses of the Quran, again very, very clearly related to the whole idea of Karbala and people coming and fighting against Imam Hussein alayhi salam. See how they are in slumber. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Everything on the earth is just an adornment to test them who's best in conduct, and see how these people are in their slumber, and they have killed the grandson of the Prophet, and they are happy about it, and they are rejoicing about it. So the verse is quite connected to the whole incident of Karbala and what people are doing on the earth. But what Zayd ibn Arqam is saying is that the very speaking or recitation of the head is stranger than the story of Ashab al-Kahf. What the verse, if Imam Hussein has recited such a verse, what it says is that the story of Karbala and Ashura is very strange. How these people are deep in their slumber and they sleep, that they do such things, they kill the grandson of their prophet, and then they rejoice, they think they have done a good thing. Now, this incidents of recitation of the Quran by head of Imam Hussein actually are reported by three people. One is Zayd ibn Arqam. The other two are also very credible people, but their account, their version of the story is a bit confused. And it did not happen in Kufa, actually. For one of them, it happened in Sham, in Syria. Minhal ibn Amr, he reports the same thing, that the head of Imam Hussein was reciting the verse while it was passing through the streets of Syria. However, his account is very confused in the sense that what is reported from him is confused. Because in some verses, in some accounts, it says that while the head was passing, I heard, Minhal says, I heard that the head was reciting Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahf wa rakim kanu min ayatina ajaba. Then there was a man who said, Amruka ra'suka yabna Rasulullah a'jab. Your head is more of a wonder, yabna Rasulullah. Now, if this had happened in Kufa, we could have said that that man was Zayd ibn Arqam, but apparently he says that this was in Sham, in Damascus. So it should be a different story. This is one version, one account of the story of Benhal. The other account is that he says the while the head was passing, a man was reciting Surah Al-Kahf and came to this verse, Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahf, and the head of Imam Hussein started to say, no, my story is more of a wonder than the story of Ashab al-Kahf. This should be a confusion, certainly. It should be a confusion. Those who reported this from Minhal are actually a bit confused about the story, probably, and they have changed it because they didn't understand or they didn't have the right account. However, this account is not mentioned by Shaykh Mufid. Many other people, Muhammad ibn Sulaiman Kufi has actually reported this from Minhal, and also Ibn Asakir, the famous Sunni historian and Muhaddith, has reported this from Minhal. Ibn Hamza Tusi has reported this from Minhal. Qutbuddin Rawandi has reported this from Minhal, and some others. However, as I said, these are not as credible as the story of Shaykh Mufid from Zayd ibn Arqam. Another man who has heard this, Salamat ibn Kuhail, who was one of the Tabi'un who supported Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, he is reported in the book of Tarikh Madinat Damashq by Ibn Asakir, the Sunni scholar, but his account is very rare. No one else has mentioned such a thing, that when the head of Imam Hussein was on the spear, I heard him saying, فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. A different verse of the Quran, of course, that Allah would save you, would protect you, and He is Sami'un Alim. This is, as I said, this is so rare that we just discard it. What is more plausible is to think that this happened in Kufa, and it was just Zayd who could see that, not other people. What Minhal mentions, it is a possibility that maybe in Syria also this has happened, but because, as I said, credible people like Shaykh Mufid have not mentioned this, we just stick to that first one, that in Kufa this incident happened, and Zayd ibn Arqam saw the head of Imam Hussein reciting this verse, and he became very much frightened by seeing that, and he stated what he stated. Okay. إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف. So, أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. Then a summary of the story. When the young people, فتية, they sought refuge to the cave, and they said, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً. Our Lord, grant us mercy from yourself and help us on to rectitude in our affair. وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. What was the request? Inshallah, I will discuss next week. But the reply of Allah as well, which we have to discuss in details, is very interesting. That's rashad, that guidance, that rectitude that they was asking from Allah. Why they were asking it, what was it that they are seeking from God, was given to them by putting them to sleep. فَضَرَبْنَا عَلَىٰ آذَانِهِمْ. Then we sealed up their hearing. We put them into sleep, deep slumber in the cave for a number of years. This was the reply, the response to their dua, that they wanted something from God, and God granted it in this way. Inshallah, we'll discuss this next week. وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِهِ الطَّاهِرِينَ.
Thank you much indeed, Sheikh. Brothers and sisters, 15-20 minutes we have about to further the discussion. Yes, Doctor?
Alaikum salam.
There is a story saying that 4 people talked after death.
Mhm.
Mu'min al-Fir'aun, Sahib Yasin, Yahya ibn Zakaria, and Imam Hussein.
Mm.
Is that...
Well, about Mu'min al-Yasin, apparently this is one of those ahadith which is somehow taken from different other traditions. And Yahya ibn Zakaria, I don't know, we don't have any account of that. But Ashab al-Kahf, because there was an idea that they were not put to sleep, they died. And then they were raised by God. And of course, they came to the city, they talked. So that is how they talked after death. Mu'min al-Yasin, because the Quran quotes him. That's Ya layta qawmi ya'lamun. After he was killed, he said, Ya layta qawmi ya'lamun. But there is no evidence that he came back to life saying that. When he was in...
No, I am not saying he's back to life.
Yeah.
They talked after their death.
Yeah, as I said, so these are taken from these stories. However, everyone would talk after death. When we die, of course, when we go to to Barzakh, all of us would talk to our relatives, to people who are there. That's why I say this is a sort of eclectic account taken from different traditions and verses of the Quran put together. It seems it's not very credible. I mean, if we put Ashab al-Kahf and Mu'min al-Yasin and Imam Hussein alayhi salam in one line, because Ashab al-Kahf were not dead. They
don't mention Ashab Kahf. Mu'min al-Fir'aun.
Mu'min al-Fir'aun, sorry. If we put them in one, also Mu'min al-Fir'aun as well. Allah says, فَبَغَهُ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِ مَا مَكَرُوا وَحَاقَ بِآلِ فِرْعَوْنَ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ. What he said after that is not clear. That's in the Quran. However, putting them in one line, Mu'min al-Fir'aun, Sahaba Yasin, and I don't know about Yahya ibn Zakaria, and Imam Hussein in one line, it does not match very much.
Thank you. Sisters, any sisters? Any brothers? Yeah. Sheikh, supposing if we, for the time being, don't connect this incident of Karbala with the story of Ashab al-Kahf, so then what was the uniqueness, or have I missed the point that you tried to explain? What was the uniqueness of the story of putting these few people to sleep for several centuries?
The connection of it with Karbala?
No. If we leave the connection outside, just to understand
why they were put to sleep. Yeah, we'll discuss this next because this needs some elaboration, of course. Why they were put...
I thought I might have missed the point today.
Yeah. Anyway, because, as I said, their response to their dua, that God guide us in our affair, was, as I said, Allah says, then we put them to sleep. So this should be something very important. Putting them to sleep should have been something very important, especially as the accounts say that after they were raised, or after they came back to wakefulness, they lived just for a couple of days and died. So what is the whole point? What was the whole point? Inshallah, we'll discuss that later.
Any sisters? Brothers? Yep, Bismillah. Okay. Just a minute, there is a... Can I have the mic, please, from there?
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question. It's kind of not related to the story of the people of the cave, but a little bit about what you were saying, but some of the... some of the stories reported after the event of Karbala, and some of them being fabricated. So could you just shed some light on the story about when after the event of Karbala, there's a narration that Imam Ali alayhi salam came in, just after, and was consoling Bibi Zainab. And she sort of saw somebody walking, and then and it was her father, and he'd come to console her and give her strength and sort of say that, you'll be okay. And initially she didn't recognize who the figure was. And so she said, who are you coming at this time? I don't know if you've heard that or if that's...
No, I haven't heard that. I haven't seen that anywhere, so...
Thank you.
This is very common in Urdu Majalis. That's for information. We've been listening, we've been hearing it from the childhood, yeah.
Alaikum salam.
Does Allah do this even now? Does He put people to sleep or have a person killing children going around even now?
Sorry, a person killing children?
I mean, like, sorry, just I'm saying, does He have this type of things happening even now? Is He putting people to sleep and waking them up after many years, or has He got a person like Khizr going around doing what he did?
No, Khizr, of course, the accounts, the reports say that he is a person with long life and he's living, like Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, for example. However, putting people to sleep, because this is out of ordinary, of course. This is not something common. When these things happen, of course, it happens for a reason, like for the story of Ashab al-Kahf. And the fact that the story is mentioned in the Quran and it says, do you think it was a wonder, means it was a wonder, of course, but not something which, compared to the wonder of the human life, could be regarded as a wonder. It may happen, but we don't have any account of this happening anywhere else, or in our own time seeing someone going into such deep sleep. We have some people who have gone into coma and come back after several years, but that is in lifespan of a human being, not outside the lifespan of a human being. These people were put to sleep for 300 years, which is absolutely outside the span of a human life. So this is quite extraordinary. We don't have any report of any other similar incident.
Nizam? Or we'll go to ladies first, then.
Thank you.
Slightly different from your main talk, but you mentioned, I can't remember in relation to what you mentioned, but you mentioned something like this is just to motivate people towards religion or some actions, I think you mentioned. So my thinking is that all of these hundreds of not hadith, definitely not hadith, but hundreds of sayings, if you like, or instructions that we get from Mufati and other places, that if you recite this 10 times or 40 times, so if you do this, you do that during different times of the day, of the year, and relating to whatever, all of these, whilst it motivates, and there's nothing wrong in reciting 100 times Ayatul Kursi or 10 times Surah Inna Anzalna, whatever, this is all dhikr. I'm just wondering, may Allah forgive me, I'm just wondering, the people whose intention was just for that, to motivate people, have they really led people on a wrong path by concentrating on those things? Again, say, doing none of those, but making sure that the leader of your local council is a just person and canvassing and voting for him, for example. Yeah? That is the message of Imam Hussein, to make sure that justice is established, rather than sitting and doing dhikr and dhikr and dhikr until time goes, not knowing what you are saying as well. May Allah forgive me.
Inshallah. No, why? Because you are wondering. Of course, you say, I wonder, may Allah forgive me for wondering. Of course, you haven't committed anything wrong. You see, we have to when we come to these sorts of issues, we have to distinguish between right and wrong. We cannot just say all these are wrong. We know that certain people have fabricated things to motivate people. There was one scholar who himself confessed, of course a Sunni scholar, that I have made up many traditions about the reward of recitation of certain surahs. While and he was a very credible man, and people believed in him that if, for example, someone recites such and such surah would get such and such reward. And he confessed towards the end of his life that, yes, I have actually made them up to encourage people to recite these surahs. And I didn't think that I have done something wrong. I actually did it with good intention. Now, absolutely this is wrong. And this man is going to be held accountable for what he did. Because if there's something is not part of religion, although we may think, because we have our own imagination, our own concept about what is good and what is bad. And we, based on that, if we attribute something to the Prophet or something to the Imam, it's absolutely wrong. But we cannot say all these things are fabricated. Many of these things are mentioned in very credible books, but in a way that we cannot doubt that they have been actually stated by the Imam or by the Prophet. So we cannot rule that out. Now, what you are saying about our social life and the social activities that we have to do, and the ritual aspect of our life, we have to separate between the two. Of course, human is a multifaceted, multidimensional creation. And in the same way that in our social life we need to establish justice, in our ritual life, in our spiritual life, in our worship, we have to establish something right as well. Therefore, we cannot say that we sacrifice one for the other. We do not sacrifice our social life for our ritual life, and we do not sacrifice our ritual life for our social life. I think we have to keep both of them together. And how can we actually establish justice, right justice, true justice, not something that we think is justice, when we are connected to the guidance of Allah, the guidance of God. And therefore, we cannot say that all of them are fake, all of them are wrong. Yes, there are many things which are wrong, many things which we have to verify. That's why verification of these things is very important. Just like, for example, as I said, here we had two stories. One story mentioned by our sister about Amirul Mu'minin, which no person, no credible person has ever mentioned in any book. And the other one about the recitation of the verse with, by Imam Hussein alayhi salam by his head. I mean, we have to distinguish between the two. One is very credible, the other one has no credit as well, at all. There's another story about Bibi Fatima, peace be upon her, when she passed away, and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein came to the house, and they didn't know what has happened, and when they encountered, they started to grieve, and this affected Bibi Fatima in a way that she stretched her arms, and after she passed away, stretched her arms and brought Hassan and Hussein in her fold. Now, this story is very interesting. Anything which is mentioned in this story is in poetry. And how is it possible that people talk to each other with poetry? I mean, Imam Hassan seeing Imam Hussein speak in poetry, seeing Imam Ali, they speak in poetry, they reply in poetry. When Bibi Fatima speaks, she replies in poetry after she has died. So first of all, there's something very strange about the whole story. It's all in poetry. And it shows that this was a poetry. This was a poetry. This was not intended. It was not intended to be actually construed as a real story. It was just a sort of imagination. Someone had some poem, and he put it in this way. Then it was put in a way. Allama Majlisi Rahmatullah alayhi says that I have seen this story in a non-credible, in a book which is not credible at all, and he does not mention what book it is. And because it is very beautiful in its poetry, I mentions it here. And it's fair. I mention it here. It's fair. He says himself it's taken from a book which is not credible. And because it is beautiful in its literature, I put it here. Then when we take that from Bahar al-Anwar, we say this happened actually, you see. This is how things are changed. And I don't know whether we should take Allama Majlisi Rahmatullah alayhi to be responsible for this or not, because he mentions himself that this is the situation of this story, but maybe he shouldn't have mentioned it at all, because I don't know whether he ever thought that people would take it as a reality or not, but this is the situation. We have to distinguish between these different stories, certainly.
Okay, before we go back to the brothers, any sisters? Anybody? Any sisters? Sisters? No? Riyadh?
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. A very good distinction to take the same point slightly further. It's only because I've read a few passages of Rumi that it gives me the impression that everything he says is not believable, but he makes it quite clear that perhaps it happened this way. And I will tell you that it really does hit the chords. What Rumi has said and the way that he just goes on about one simple thing. I mean, I could be forgiven for saying that he said all of that under stupor, under influence of drugs. It is so effective. It is so effective.
May God forgive you.
Inshallah. So you see now, in the same vein, if I was to exaggerate something, to put something across to a crowd, with the reasoning that I am doing something good, to what extent would you believe that should be permissible?
You see, sometimes, for example, let's come back to the incident of Karbala. Okay, we somehow let our imagination speak. Okay, for example, what would have happened when Zainab came to see Imam Hussein alayhi salam, something like that. As long as it is clear for the crowd that this is just imagination, this is just speaking as though we think that the reactions would have been something like that, is fine. As I say, as long as people know this is poetry, it's very important to distinguish between poetry and reality. But if we want to put something forward, knowing that people are going to believe that this is reality, because these things, you see, you do it in good intention, others may do it not in good intention. And you do it in good intention with your own understanding of the event, and others do it with their understanding of the event, and our understandings are very different, and then we create very different stories that then future generations come and say, well, can all these be true? It's all sort of rubbish. I mean, we cannot accept that these things at all happened, for example. These things happened to Imam Hussein, or Imam Hussein was such a personality to react in this way, because it's all our making, isn't it? So we have to avoid that, and we know that people in the past, they were very, very careful, especially our scholars, very careful about such things, that they would not add anything to the real story.
Any sisters? No? Zuhair?
Assalamu
Alaikum salam.
You mentioned that the Ashab al-Kahf, the 300 years, was not sort of within a lifespan. But yet we find in the Quran that Nabi Nuh lived for 2,500 years, 950. So how does a lifespan work? Was that extraordinary? Because it doesn't seem to appear to be sort of something that the Quran treats it as
the accounts that we have is apparently in old days the lifespan of man was longer than say later generations, say about, for example, especially after Musa alayhi salam, the lifespans were not like that, or at the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam onwards, the lifespans were much shorter. In old days, apparently the lifespans were longer, and the accounts we have, of course not in the Quran, but in traditions or in history, is that people living at the time of Nuh, they also had long lives, not of course as 2,500 years. So his life is very extraordinary, his lifespan. But what I was trying to mention is that people who go in coma, nowadays we see them, could we regard that as a miracle? For example, they put to sleep and then they come back. As I said, if it's outside the lifespan of a human being, it may be extraordinary. But if it's inside the lifespan of a human, we cannot take these things as miracles or something like that.
I think, well, there is a man in India, I think about 170 years old, 180 years old, something like that, and they
170.
something like that.
Wow,
Yes,
poor man.
they've actually verified that. But anyway, any sisters? This is on the Facebook. Any sisters? Manzur?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
A few sessions before you were mentioning about the plurality of beliefs, and then you say that one person has one belief and the other person has a different belief, and they're all aiming for the same closeness to Allah. And then what you mentioned about some people or creating or bring about stories to motivate people towards Allah. Is there not a danger that people who try to do this sort of things, like which is not actually the truth, but they knowingly they make stories to say that, okay, for example, if you read such and such for so many times, will bring you this reward. This leads towards these variations and then further on deviations in the beliefs over a period of time. And how can this be avoided?
Well, avoiding these things, of course, we cannot stop people doing it. But what we can do is always compare what people say with credible accounts. And that's why credible books are very important. Books of people like Shaykh Mufid are very important because we usually compare things with that to see whether he has reported such a thing or not, or if anyone else have mentioned anything about it. And therefore, first of all, doing this is bid'ah. I mean, now we have bid'ah in religion, we have bid'ah in things which are related to religion, like these histories. It's bid'ah. Bid'ah is to bring into religion whatever is not part of religion. We may do it with good intention. We believe that praying with the tied hands is bid'ah. It may be a good bid'ah when people say, okay, when we put our hands like this or like this, respect. Okay, it's respect. You think it's good. However, you are not authorized to add something that you think is good to faith. It's only God who can say, through his prophet, who can say what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And because, as I said, people have different tastes. I may think that when I pray, it's good that I only pray in a very small, dark room, for example. And then I say, everyone should pray in such a room. It may be my opinion, but it's not the opinion of the lawgiver, and therefore it's a bid'ah. So we have to avoid it. Avoiding it is always referring to credible authorities in history, in Sharia, in whatever, to compare it. And if anything does not match it, we say it's wrong, it's fake.
Okay, Shaykh, brother, sister, we have run out of our time. Inshallah, we continue next week.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad sallallahu